Massive thank you as always to our top tier patrons, Sarah Turner and Justin Harper. The podcast takes a considerable amount of work, so we really do appreciate everyone's contribution. You can support us too at patreon.com. It's not just in your head. Perks include access to our Discord server where we regularly discuss all kinds of things and access to our monthly reading groups. Alternatively, please do follow us on social media or rate us on Apple Podcasts and help spread the word. And this week's random call out goes to patron Devon Wright. Today, myself and substance abuse counsellor Ecoy Hero speak to returning guest Alfie Bown about his new book, Dream Lovers, The Gamification of Relationships. Alfie is a lecturer in digital media at Royal Holloway, University London. He is a founding editor of 1968 Press, and his journalism has appeared in Tribune, New Statesman, Paris Review, and The Guardian.
In the mental health field, too often, we've made it seem as if it's just in your head. If
the landlord can hijack the rent by 20%, that impacts people's mental health.
We can't have a profit-driven mental health care system if we want our people to be connected and healthy.
I don't have an opening question. It's just, reading the book, I was while I was reading, I was starting to think about my own online experience and was this when I was herded by the algorithm kind of sense. Yeah.
What I wanted to do with this book is also think a bit about my own online experiences and I jokingly introduced this book as something that happened when I got divorced, which I think in many ways it is. In God knows, I don't know actually how long, 3 or 4 years ago, I separated from my wife and spent a lot of time online. Now, I didn't find love or anything through these online interactions or really, to be honest, get deeply into the online dating game or online friendship building, even, to be totally honest with you. But what I was really aware of was that things that had been functions that had been filled by a relationship started to be filled by the internet in various and quite contradictory different ways. And so my book was kind of trying to explore how this is possible, how there can be a situation where it's not possible in this kind of Black Mirror. We're not in a dystopia in this kind of Black Mirror sense where you're literally living and loving a robot, but in certain ways, functions that could have been served by another human being or perhaps even a lover can be kind of outsourced and provided by a complex network of robots, algorithms and internet platforms. And I think that's what I kind of wanted to explore, really. Yeah,
because there's a bit, maybe it's not early on, maybe it's actually towards the end of the book where it's kind of definitely made me think, where you just say what if the thing you're falling in love with is not Tinder or Hinge or whatever, it's the actual app. It's the app itself.
And I mean, I should not take credit for that, really, because it's from a brilliant book. I really recommend a kind of part novel, part memoir by a Irish writer, Roisin Kibbers. It's called The Disconnect. And she writes about it's kind of part love story and part critique of the internet. It's a brilliant book. It only came out 1 year ago, let's say. And she also writes about this. She found her partner, I think it was Gmail, which in these days is pretty archaic and retro. Wow. That they kind of mostly communicated through. But yeah, she raises all these fascinating questions about how do we know whether it is technology that is just connecting us to other people, as technology likes to claim to do, or is it actually using people to connect to us? Is it the technology itself that, this long-standing marketing idea that, the function of social media is to connect people to each other? Is it actually possible that was just being used, really? And of course, I think it probably was. And sometimes it's more, Facebook itself is more important than the person you're talking to through it. And I think that's true. I'm not saying we're all in love with Facebook or Tinder, but in a sense, these technologies do function to replace an object of desire or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think also, as a side, it sort of potentially raises a bit of a red flag when you see on these dating profiles where people are sort of bemoaning the fact they're like, oh, I'm back on this app again. You know, I hate this app. I didn't expect to be on this app at this age. It's like, is that sort of an early insight into how you'd also be treated? You know,
right, yeah.
if you were in the relationship.
I didn't expect to be back on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I mean, and it's fascinating, really. I mean, of course, there is no dichotomy between real life relationships and online relationships. I mean, even with your partner who you live with and see every day, say you share a bed with them, say you even work together as well, you still communicate enormously through platforms. And, you know, lots of flirting takes place through WhatsApp between married couples, for example. Now, that's something in a way much more important. You know, a lot of attention is given to, oh, imagine meeting someone online, you know, in the 90s it was anyway, or early 2000s. But, you know, in a way more important is the fact that, you know, flirting, for example, has migrated from something quite instinctively bodily into something quite algorithmically driven and based on codes and patterns. I mean, for example, emojis, the importance of emojis in flirting is critical, isn't it now, which it wouldn't have been before. So these platforms play a role in these really subtle ways in our engagement with others and our desire, I suppose.
Yeah, and the idea that you had this quote from Todd McGowan that commodity that the dating service sells is much more valuable than those sold by the grocery store because it carries with it the illusion of complete satisfaction. And there's just sort of this sort of very interesting sort of subjects that you're raising around what you know, the ideal relationship is, what love is, and how it's all sort of bound up in politics, culture, and technology, that it's shaped by all of those.
Yeah,
things.
I mean, on that point, the quote there from Tom McGowan, I mean, I like Tom McGowan's writing a lot. I mean, this comes from this brilliant book, Capitalism and Desire. But I think the argument made there is relatively straightforward. It's just simply that we live in a world where we believe that we want to be fulfilled, we want to be completed, as it were. And a lot of advertising historically gears itself towards speaking to that desire. You know, this product will complete you. And of course, we know there's irony and there's various layers to that. Like, nobody genuinely believes that buying a pair of Nike trainers is going to make you fulfilled, but at the same time, it's part of the product's role to imply that. But like Todd McGowan's point, I suppose, which is a kind of Lacanian psychoanalytic point, is really that the thing is, you'll never be fulfilled and you don't want to be. You know, so it's extremely unhealthy to, you know, in Lacanian terms, the last thing you'd want is to be fulfilled. You know, what you want is to keep desiring, to keep needing things, you know, whereas capitalism, and this is what McGowan's book's about really, is it sells you this kind of lie. And I suppose the American dream would be another word for this lie, or another phrase. You know, it sells you this idea that actually it would be possible and desirable to reach this point of fulfillment, and therefore you can be marketed to. And this, in a way, the whole of the sort of marketing industries are based on this lie. Whereas the Lacanian position would be that the most desirable, let's say, the preferable position to be in would be the unfulfilled and still desiring.
Right.
You know, yeah.
If I had to sort of lay out my understanding of it so far from a kind of, you know, complete non-professional point of view, as far as desire goes, there's this sort of history in psychoanalysis which says the human being is a creature that lacks things, and it has to go around its whole life trying to fill this existential hole. And then someone else comes along and sort of flips it on its head and says, no, we are creatures that desire things. And it's not that we have some existential hole that needs filling. It's just that we like to want things, right? And then the extension of that here, or certainly the thing that's like amazing and also really troubling, is this idea that whatever your desire isn't yours. that it comes from the collective, although that you feel it as yours. And that is like huge, because like, what do you do with that information? Because I don't think the sort of general population it understands that concept. Everything is sort of felt and you react to it.
Okay, so I suppose there are two different points there. The point that we've just made via the kind of Todd McGowan thing, that actually you don't want to be fulfilled, or you shouldn't, is one thing that, as you say, the general public don't necessarily realise. Although the general public's perhaps the wrong way of thinking about it, because I don't realise it either, even though I can say it to you right now. So I still structure my life as if I want to be fulfilled, even though I can have a conversation with you in which I say, clearly this is not, because there's no way out of it. We're unconsciously sort of structured in this way. Anyway, and the second point which you were coming on to is the fact that your desires are not your own. And as I say in my book, I've tried to sort of argue this point and show this point, that basically what you think you want isn't what you've decided to want. But which in this society, I guess you could always say that. Throughout history, you could say that, religion perhaps, and then after that, perhaps the family. We could perhaps then say even literature, and then maybe even cinema. These big industries, or maybe video games.
Right.
All of these huge kind of, they don't give people what they want. They restructure desire, and they transform desire. They create a new desiring population, and they tell us what to want and how to want things. So the argument of my book, in a real nutshell, is that desire is always completely structured by popular culture and technology. Technology could also be like before the internet, so the religion is a kind of technology, and then literature is a kind of technology, and then but now our desires are being really restructured again, and this is what I really wanted to say most of all, that exactly this. If you could imagine a time where religion told you what to want, and you can imagine a time where family values told you what to want, you can imagine a time where Hollywood cinema told you what to think and feel and desire. And now you're in a new world where it's the algorithms that structure the internet and big tech, and how they manipulate those and organize those, which tell you what to think and feel. So yes, your very deepest feelings are not your own, but in a nutshell, you were told to feel and think those things by corporations and algorithms which were designed to make you think and feel them.
Right, and that's and the silver lining to that idea or insight is that, well, if desire can be manufactured, then any particular side of the political spectrum can then also decide to start fueling that.
Yeah, totally. And this was what I wanted to sort of playfully, like in my book, there's like at the end of each chapter a little kind of stupid, to be honest with you, suggestion of like how the left or how socialism could use technology to manufacture desire, in the way that, I suppose in the same way Chomsky talks about manufacturing consent, how could the left manufacture desire in new ways? And these I did in quite a silly way. Like one is like a wearable device, like a Fitbit, or what do you call those things? An Apple Watch or a Fitbit that had like kind of a socialist value system inbuilt to its this piece of technology. One is a dating site, and one is a video game, a dating simulator. One's a dating algorithm, and it's like but the point with these kind of playful suggestions is that I don't think we should be anti-technology. The fact that we are being manipulated, we are basically lemmings, doing exactly what Google says whenever Google wants us to do it. Obviously I'm exaggerating, but the fact that we have become a population whose desires are programmed by capitalists and corporations is actually a reason for hope and promise, because if the capitalists and the corporations can reprogram our desires so that we're exactly the kind of subjects they want us to be, that also therefore follows that we control our own desires and could reprogram ourselves. And I suppose there's a long history here. Donna Haraway and her kind of cyborg feminism would be a kind of 80s version of this history, but also among trans activists and among various kinds of LGBTQ theorists. There is this feeling that technology is a means of escape from the entrapment of capitalism and corporations as well. So absolutely, as you said, Liam, it's all bad what's happening now, because basically we're being told what to desire and we're just going along with it like a bunch of morons. But the fact that that's happening means there's an enormous potential to reprogram ourselves into the future. And that could be quite an exciting and promising project, I think.
Yeah, and just in terms of examples of sort of just cases that you outline in the book to sort of demonstrate the point, I thought the example, is it Behe and the Zima credit combination is a perfect example of where you say, love and desire is shaped by politics, culture, and tech, and that example you give is great as an proof of concept. Yeah. Did you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, sure. This again, like you said. When I heard this, I thought, you're joking. This can't be, But like a lot of these things, the research for this book was really, really interesting. Like it takes like 1 second of digging, and then you start looking at what these companies are actually doing and how these programs are actually running. And it's the easiest thing to research in the world, because the first thing you find out is just like mind-blowing. And they are evil. I think when I last talked on your podcast, we talked about Alibaba and this kind of car that knows when you're hungry and stuff. And this example of Behe was really, really similar. Like, I just couldn't believe it, really. So you remember when in the US, there was a big furore, let's say, saying that word right, about the Beijing social credit system, which was basically it was just like all over the New York Times, like, Beijing is going to start ranking citizens. If they are subservient to the government, then they'll get points or whatever, like in-game rewards for that. And then, I started thinking about this, looking into it. And, lots of this is really wrapped up in like America's quite imprecise representations of China, and it's nonsense. But this thing Behe, it's been going. This is always the way it goes. You read a big article in the New York Times that says, "Oh my God, China are doing this." You scratch like 2 levels below the surface, you realize all American companies and Chinese companies have been doing it for about 5 or 10 years. So, it's clearly just rhetoric when it appears in the New York Times or whatever. But Behe, as you asked, anyway, sorry, I've taken a long time to get there. I just wanted to preface it by, I just don't want to seem like someone who's slagging off China, basically, because I think that that's one of the issues here. But this is a Chinese example, and it's basically based on Zima Credit Score, which is an Alibaba company. They based their model on an American credit score model. So it all comes from the US to begin with. And anyway, but what Behe does, which is totally unusual, in Zima Credit Score, people do kind of compete for points. You can get points for sort of investing money, typical credit score stuff, repaying your bills on time. But it also does have some quite strange categories. For example, if one of your social media contacts is blacklisted, you lose points for being a friend of theirs, and so on. So you are looking at, kind of a police state issue where, you're losing points on your sort of credit system by doing things which are non-conformist, let's say. But what's weird about Behe, the dating app, which I think is the 3rd or 4th biggest in China, or it was 2 years ago, it bases its matching system on the Zima credit score. So what that means is basically the better your credit score, it ranks them separately. So it gives people a sort of quality of match. So it knows, like all of these dating apps, it works out what are the best 5% of people you might match with, and then it offers you some of them, offers you some other random people. But basically, if you have a higher Zima credit score, it allows you to access stronger matches. So it's really in microcosm pointing to how this relationship between the capitalist city and dating works. It's basically saying, we'll give you what you want, but only in this kind of particular set of ways. It's trying to tie desire into a kind of particular set of things, right? So if you're wealthier, if you're more conformist, you'll get better matches. And it's I mean, in a way, I suppose, what's the difference between this and the old days of Chaplin movies where it was like, you've got to get a job before you get a wife? But at the same time, there is something quite unbelievable about a situation where you're actually matching with people based on an algorithm that's reading into your history of investment and your history of social behavior and giving you a score on that account, and then giving you opportunities to match with people that you're more likely to match with based on that score. It is totally dystopian, and I mean, it's hard to even explain the issues with it, but it's quite mad that that's even happening.
Yeah, that you can link up all these data points is the sort of fundamentally terrifying thing. Potentially, again, all this technology could be used for much more progressive, socially beneficial things. You might be able to match it. Like, I thought actually your example of the smartwatch was really good. Just that idea that, it could give you reminders during the day about various issues that might be affecting your mental health beyond individualized stuff that, like, hey, the sort of socioeconomic conditions that are in currently, and there's political things. It could, as a device that reminds you or tells you that certain things are going on around you, like political organizations. I think that's a really cool idea, as is the idea that it monitors your boss, rather than it monitoring you, you can monitor it. So again, it's that whole thing of like, what is stuff for? And I think that example, the Zima credit thing is just an example of like, well, this is what happens when it's in service of, these particular kind of companies. It's just about the money, obviously.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you're totally. I mean, that's exactly right. What I was trying to do with that like wearable idea, like, as I say, it was sort of playful, silly idea, but yeah, like, that was a way of an idea that maybe could combat the kind of wellness industry, and I suppose this connects to like mental health and stuff, which you guys are really interested in, like, so much of the mental health discourse, especially wellness industry, happiness industry, focuses on what you yourself can do, appeal of Jordan Peterson, for example, what you can do yourself as an individual to improve your conditions. But, exactly. From a socialist point of view, what would actually be much more, or a Marxist point of view, let's say, what would be much more effective is not pointing to what you could individually do to improve your situation, but to pointing to the fact that you are a symptom of your structure and your society and of the way in which your society is run. So, this would be the kind of politicizing smart watch or whatever you call those things, politicizing Fitbit, which says to you, look, you're feeling this way. And instead of, changing your diet, what about, campaigning for this thing that would change this for everyone,
Yeah. Just that idea of connecting you up with strangers that might be totally on board with something you're trying to achieve is kind of a cool idea. But I also think, it's one of the things that we sort of very briefly touched on last time, which was this whole thing of cyborgs, right? Like, there was this article that I had read from various people who had artificial limbs, and they were talking about how when their leg was like in the cupboard, like their spare leg, it was like part of them was sort of missing. Even if they had the other leg on, another part of them was in another part of the room. And it talks to that the technology, whether it's a leg or a smartphone, is an extension of us. And the bit where it gets uncomfortable is where you lose control. Or even worse, you think you're in control, but you are being controlled. And that's a big part of the sort of algorithmic, the algorithmic shaping of consumers or citizens, which is a point of concern generally. But I'm sort of fascinated by this. There's a bit in the book where he talks about how digital technology has changed the nature of time, that there is already a path laid out for you as a consumer, an algorithmic path that the future is already there. You just have to sort of step into.
This was one of the things that, on reflection, I thought was kind of more philosophically interesting. But yeah, I mean, basically the point here is pretty simple. A lot of people talk about, what one in tech circles hears about predictive technology, which basically means when technology knows what you want before you want it, before you know yourself what you want. And the whole concept is that the technology will give you what you want, even though you didn't know you want it. So, for instance, any suggestion on YouTube, this is old stuff. Your Spotify playlists, whatever, they suggest things to you that you might like because they can predict what you might want. But the thing I wanted to say about this was that it isn't actually that way round. The predictive technology kind of decides in advance what you're going to want, and then invites you to want it. So, you might want to eat this at this time, but you haven't realized. But the thing is, you might never have realized it. It's not that. So there's a philosophy here of time, I suppose. You want to talk in abstract academic terms. And if you guys probably have philosopher type academics on your podcast who talk in different type of language to me, but you could easily make a philosophy of time over this and say that, well, actually there's something going on with time here, because basically, to put it in a nutshell, the rich have already constructed the future and simply invite the worker class to participate in this. So it sort of throws off what sort of time is, because predictive technology doesn't predict what's going to happen. It decides what's going to happen and invites you to be part of that future, which is already there. So yeah, it's one of the ways in which I think it's important to sort of connect class politics with technology. And but it's not, it's not a sort of Heideggerian philosophy of time. It's more that just literally it's already there, and the way we live is that we decide to do things that are already there waiting for us to decide to do.
Right. And on the ground, if I've got this correct, that this often tends to manifest in, you'll be having a conversation with some friends or colleagues about something, then the next day there'll be adverts for said thing on your social media feed, and people will freak out like, oh, they're listening. And as far as I understand it, they might be listening, but actually what's happening is that you have been predicted and you are now in this sort of funnel, right? And you're behaving exactly as their model had predicted. And it wasn't necessarily like the model is amazing at predicting who you are. It's just that this model exists and they reckon you fit into it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the point about listening is really fascinating. In a quick 1 second or 5 second nutshell, what I think is important to say about this is they can listen, but they don't, because they've got much more economically efficient ways of knowing what you're about to do than listening. So, there's no question all of the talk about can, your MacBook listen your voice when it's off? Sure. Of course it can, but nobody bothers. They don't bother to do that. Companies like Cambridge Analytica, Palantir, or any of the millions of advertising predictive technology companies that exist, they don't bother to listen because And also, voice recognition software is absolutely shit. As you know, when you talk to Alexa and you're like, I don't know, play the Libertines, and they're just like, here is Lionel Richie. You know, so the voice recognition software is not, it's not up to it. So, but the point I'm making is a serious one. They have much more efficient and effective ways of knowing what you're about to do and what you then listening, and what you say is not their issue. They don't care what you say, but because what you say is already being programmed by the technologies that are supposedly listening. You know, so in a way, we're way beyond the dystopia where there's a little microphone in every room and they're listening to everything. We're way beyond that. They don't bother listening because they already told you what to say.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a concept that was interesting as well in the book, peak libido. And I'm just wondering, because I think that's what this is getting at, is that how do you, if everything we've been talking about, the stuff in your book, is 100% true, how does someone navigate the world knowing that their thoughts or feelings might not be their own? Like, how do you make decisions about your life in general if you can't necessarily trust your feelings?
Okay. No, that's an incredibly good question, because I suppose what you're saying is that, lots of what I sort of say is that, everything you think, as I'm repeating myself, everything you think and feel is not your own feelings. You're sort of being told to say it, you know. So how do you then sort of combat that situation? But I suppose I would say, first and foremost, like, realizing that, you know, look, and let me put it this way. I like going on to Call of Duty and shooting someone in the head with a sniper rifle. And I don't think that that's wrong. And I also think it's fine to go and eat at McDonald's, you know. What I think is not important, but like the point I'm making is that all of these desires are totally programmed. Obviously, it's bad for lots of reasons to spend £50 on a game and then shoot Arabs in the head when you're playing it. And obviously it's bad to go and support the meat industry and eat a Big Mac in a McDonald's or whatever. You know, lots of the things we do and take pleasure from are programs, and they're not our own desires, but we still need them and we still want to experience them. We can't not have, you know, we can't escape the situation that we're in. But what we can do is realize that desires can be changed and sort of gradually work on these things. Like, this is one of the things I think is good about veganism, which I'm not a vegan, but I've tried. But I think that one of the things that's interesting about veganism, of which I would love criticisms also, is that it's sort of, you're retraining yourself to sort of to have different tastes, different desires. And this is, I think, everything, as Freud would have argued. You know, for one of the interesting things in Freud is that smell is the most ideological of the senses. Now, that's really interesting because it seems to us the most instinctive. You know, recoil from a shit, you know, eat a avocado. But, you know, taste and smell, you know, clearly avocados, which I accidentally mentioned, are more delicious after Instagram than before Instagram. You know, technology changes desires, feelings, tastes, thoughts. And I think that, you know, by recognizing this reprogrammable nature of desire, we can gradually turn ourselves into better, more progressive. We could gradually lobby for more progressive things. And I think that, you know, the vegan movement has been one of the very few successful, I wouldn't even call it socialist, but potentially socialist movements, because basically socialism's totally collapsed over the last, as you know. So, you know, you can see those things taking hold. And one of the things that veganism has, which, you know, Corbyn and Sanders socialism didn't have, is the sort of reprogramming yourself, operating on the body. You know, so being like, well, I used to enjoy this bacon sandwich, but now I enjoy this piece of whatever
cardboard.
Yeah,
I'm joking. I'm joking.
Soylent or whatever, But
to a certain. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no. I think I'm finished. But the point is just that I think there's something to be said for the way in which veganism operated on the body, and contemporary socialism has failed to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, as my line of work, that what you're talking about in terms of changing desire is part of, I think, any major behavior change in general, but especially when it comes to substance use. So absolutely, I do think. I mean, I guess one of the things that I was kind of trying to figure out as I read the book is because the fact that like our desires aren't our own is not a new one. Like you said, it's been mediated by literature and by film and by society in general, right? There's a reason that, like, to a certain degree, we all tend to agree with our friends and, oftentimes with our families or, our social categories. So this isn't necessarily new. It was just kind of like how, these new technologies create more cohesion as much as more conflict. So what was unique about this book is, I think, because so much of focus is on technology and its ability to create conflict. And your book was kind of unique in the sense of like, oh, now how do we use this technology for love and cohesion? Yeah, and that was kind of where I was trying to figure out, like, one aspect of, I think, to a certain degree, it's also like, because the way I've kind of mediated using technology is for like the purpose of more of a connection rather than conflict, is it actually knowing less about people?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, as in like social media platforms, etc., or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
They reveal too much of a person.
Right. I mean, like, there are a lot of close friends that I refuse to connect on social media with.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, yeah. I mean, so recently, for instance, I talked to someone that I'd met on an app, yeah, this exact thing happened just during the WhatsApp conversation. That they had they had obviously then sort of dug through Facebook and decided to made XYZ conclusions. And I've always sort of taken quite an open view of these things. So yeah, so clearly there was a situation there where you could really sort of investigate who each other were and so on. And I think it does, of course, sap the desire out of a connection. But that applies to all relationships, doesn't it? I mean, now your sort of online mode or your sort of your online, I think persona is a really unuseful word. Basically, there's now a situation where you are sort of fully cyborg with your online self. So it is them. I mean, it is them. I mean, the things people tweet, it is them. It's not like there's another them. That is them. And I don't know. I'm not quite sure what you were asking, Ikoi, but I suppose I share your sort of feeling that the unknowableness has gone, and as Freud or Roland Barthes would have said, or even like Derrida, the old theorists of desire,
right?
The bit that is veiled is the thing that's sort of needed for desire to happen. That's why you don't want to see someone naked. You'd rather see them with a nice shirt on with a revealing neckline or something, because there has to be something unknowable for desire to function. And perhaps a lot of desire has been eradicated by the fact that there is so much present and so much revealed, let's say. And maybe that goes to, Liam, your question earlier about peak libido, which is this concept from Stiegler, where, in the sense of peak oil, there's going to be a dearth of libido. And I think, I do see a possibility where everyone bears all, to deliberately use the sort of, clothing puns, or everyone is revealed online, and that does kind of sap desire out of social life. I think it probably does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's that sort of interesting idea as well in the book that I think comes from psychoanalysis, which is like that you don't really want to get what you think you want, and if you do get what you want, it will be traumatizing. Isn't it like better to get involved in the trauma so you can get over it and find something more meaningful on the other side? Like, I mean, a pithy example is Jim Carrey, right? He obviously wanted to be big and famous and popular. It happened to him, and then he just sort of lost his mind and went all kind of Alan Watts mode. And it's like, is he better for having gone through that? I don't know. But there is this, you can see a sort of, I see a point that like we have no choice but to, desire things, and it's just what are the things is sort of what sort of indicates the kind of culture we're living in and its values. But I do wonder also, like, is it a bit sad that might be the only game in town? That isn't it better to desire things, hopefully get them, and then realize they're all bollocks, and then become, Buddha?
I think about the point I'd want to make about the all you can choose is the things you want thing. I think there is something really important there. Like, I mean, we're quite a divided society, aren't we? And if one person wants to be a academic and one person wants to be a banker, you could argue that is, the same structure of desire. And I think this is completely fair. And one of the things we suffer from is judging others by what they desire, when the structure of desire is exactly the same. So, you can easily get academics who are a perfect example of this because of how arrogant and predictable they are, saying, negative things about people who work in industry and the city and so on. But if you sort of look even slightly below the surface, the structure of those desires is exactly the same. So this kind of superficial, really baby boomer distinction between those who followed their passions and those who followed the money is completely arbitrary if you look at that psychoanalytically, because the structure of that desire is matching. So there is no difference between a hippie who follows I don't know what they do, or a banker who follows, I don't know what they do either. But the point I want to make is that the solidarity should come as somebody who what I want to do is find ways to use psychoanalysis to build socialism. And I think the way in which psychoanalysis can build socialism is by showing us that actually the structure of our desires, the structure of our thoughts, feelings, emotions is the same, even when is similar, is enough for solidarity, even when we seem like different people. So we've lived for the last 20 years in a world where someone who chooses to be a banker is considered to be different to someone who chooses to be a lecturer, who's considered to be someone who's different to being a farmer. But actually, if you look at the structure of desire and how these functions work, you can see patterns here which make us all part of the same structures and systems. And that's where psychoanalysis can be Marxist and be socialist and show that up. So it's not really an answer to your question, but in a way, it's probably the most important thing I've so far said.
Yeah, sorry, Ikoi. I feel like, I know I've spoken a lot. So I don't know if you had any sort of other questions before I rinse Alfie of all his energy.
No, I mean, a lot of, I mean, this book was like a lot less questions and just kind of, I went on like a wormhole of like how all these like things kind of like trying to look at how I've responded to it, or like how it's impacted my life, or how I've seen like examples of it in other people. So my, experience of the book was more along those lines. So I have, less questions rather than it's just, it was a lot more of just like thinking about the impact of all these technologies in our lives, and how much it's actually not changed things, like Alfie has said, with the desire being mediated before. Because that was one of the major things of just like kind of looking back, going like, oh, like I think the frequency of it is the main thing that's changed with technology, and that's kind of an experience that, like, I went without my smartphone for over a month. And so like that experience, very recently, and that experience versus, getting it back, and just kind of like how much I'm more exposed to in terms of algorithm, that, those differences. But at the end of the day, like, it's really not so much that there is a qualitative difference rather than a quantitative difference.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree with that, and I think, as you said, what I was pointing out, I suppose. I mean, I don't really know, to be honest, what I was trying to do with anything. it's just, but one of the things that I was certainly thinking about was exactly as you said. This is not, this is not something sort of mind blowing or particularly different. The point is just that, like, these desires, these feelings, these thoughts that have become sort of part and parcel of our normal everyday life are so kind of bound up in all of these kind of technologies in a way that it sort of becomes almost nonsense to talk about them. And just to sort of see some examples of those, and I don't know, it's one of these weird things, like, just to, even if you use Facebook all the time, I always find it, if you read about Facebook, you're like, oh my God, that is the thing. It's just kind of, it's important to just kind of take that minute to sort of be like, okay, these are the sort of things that we have become so accustomed to using that they're just, they're just there now. They're just ubiquitous. They're part of our thought processes and so on. I agree. I don't think I've raised new ideas in the book, but more just like thought about things that we often use without thinking about.
Right. I mean, I think it was really interesting in that, like, you kind of like parcel out these exact ways in how these technologies and algorithm works. And that does give you a sense of, like, where do you start in thinking about, like, technologies and how it impacts your life. And, again, like, talking about like desire and how that is mediated by algorithms, I mean, and so in many ways, like, like, I don't think that a book needs to bring up a lot of questions. I think something that brings up a lot of, awareness, and kind of like gives you a way of thinking about these topics are valuable in itself. Because, these are things that a lot of people don't think about, especially those that have grown up with technology. I think, I'm at an age where I'm kind of at that cusp where we grew up with computers, but we also didn't.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably exactly right. I mean, I'm 33, and yeah, I guess that's exactly it. This probably will be a particularly important period in terms of theorizing this transition, because I mean, well, the internet, 1993. This is what I teach at my college. I teach history of the internet. I'm extremely interested in history of the internet, basically what that did to networks, to communication, to desire, to socialism, to, the internet, burst into people's homes at a particular period in time and totally transforms like how one thinks and feels. And one of the things that people struggle with now, with solidarity, with empathy, with is the fact that it's not a divide in the sense of an internet and a non-internet group of people, but that the internet has kind of cut across existing categories and is one of the reasons why some of the elections that have not been as predicted. Of course, we know that the Obama election in 2008 and the Trump election in 2015 could probably not have happened without the internet. But we also know that Brexit couldn't have happened without the internet, and we know that we know that the internet has totally cut through existing forms of communication, organizing, solidarity, and beyond that, desire and impulse. And that to exist in today's society means to live in a world of this kind of media, this kind of network. Media is the wrong word, this kind of network. So yeah, I think if we want to understand love, if we want to understand elections, if you want to understand politics, if you want to, you have to understand the internet and its function on us and its combination of what did we say earlier? Combination of dividing us from each other and connecting us with each other, and this new world of dividing and connecting that has become our lives is transforming everything from elections to relationships, and that's basically what I wrote this book for.
Yeah. Okay, so just going to go down a particularly dark path, so I can always cut this out if it doesn't land. But there's a book, Post-Capitalist Desire. It was Mark Fisher's final lectures, and he was quoting someone in the lecture, but I'll just read a bit because it was, whilst I was reading your book, I suddenly thought of this passage. There is a masochistic desire. There is an enjoyment in being subjugated to the intensities of capital. One can enjoy swallowing the shit of capital, its materials, its polystyrene, its books, its sausage pates, swallowing tons of it till you burst. Then people, potentially, I guess, like us, will say, we'll save you from it. We will work to liberate you from this servitude. We will give you dignity. And in this way, you situate yourself on the most despicable side, the moralistic side, where you desire that our capitalized desire be totally ignored. Of course we suffer, but this does not mean that we do not enjoy. So is that basically saying that there's a sort of a kind of a sick enjoyment in suffering, and that is another form of desire that
okay, yeah. So I mean, in psych, there's so many answers to that, different ones. I mean, in psychoanalytic terms, obviously there is a whole history of theorizing through Freud and Lacan, the weird dark desire of suffering and so on. But I think that's probably not the way to answer this question from the Mark Fisher argument, which is that, I think what Mark Fisher is getting at, which is totally right, is that we, the left has suffered enormously from this kind of quite willing position of victim. And I mean, this is going to be probably quite controversial comment, I suppose, but I think that one of the reasons why there is no socialism and there is no left, which was Mark Fisher's project to try and build a digital left, that's what he dedicated his career to. And the reason why this kind of blogger culture and digital culture that Fisher was so inspirational in didn't turn into a cohesive kind of left movement beyond, hoping that Bernie Sanders or Corbyn would edge past, or Mélenchon would edge past Le Pen or whoever they were up against, is partly because the left took this position of victim and opted into this position of sort of the one who suffered at the hands of capital. So, yeah, I think, I mean, I'm not the person to solve the problems of the left. But, clearly, yes, this is right that, for, we probably do need a way of thinking about building socialism or solidarity even outside of sort of saying that we're sort of powerless victims to these kind of technologies and so on. I think that's sort of been running through the whole conversation we've had, really, that why is this? We are sort of stuck. Like, people are either saying these technologies are bad, they're controlling your minds, which they are, or they're saying they're fine, they're opening us into a new future and so on, which they are. But we definitely need another way of thinking about this, which is not being the victims of technology, but grabbing hold of it and working within it. I know how hard that is, obviously, when there's no money to do it. But
yeah, but I also I do think and this just echoing the original podcast we did, that the future has to include. Talking about structure, the future has to include employee-owned businesses and co-ops, because you can't build anything progressive if it's ultimately going to be one person at the top takes all the money and makes all the decisions.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is also it. I mean, yeah, no, and for those kind of things, this is probably one of the bleaker times we've been in, I suppose. I'm sure, like you, like perhaps perhaps similar to this podcast. I mean, we're all doing free, extra, precarious work. Yeah. But these things always fall into structures which basically replicate and copy, the capitalist structures of ownership that we supposedly want to oppose and avoid. So yeah, we're screwed.
Yeah, well, one sort of glimmer of hope, and not necessarily you put all your eggs in this basket because it's a bit of a stuck record, but there's a very good podcast where One Dime, the Canadian content creator, was interviewing a person about the blockchain, and they list various different ways that it can be used beyond just the crap sort of cryptocurrency stuff, and it's fascinating. Like, there's really
well, look,
really
blockchain. I mean, it's not what we. It's not. I'm no expert. It's not what we're going to talk about. But the concept of blockchain originated as a kind of socialist alternative to banks. Some of the early pioneers of blockchain were extremely socialist and thinking extremely progressive things about what this technology could achieve. And it's the same with the internet, really. I mean, not Tim Berners-Lee, obviously, but like early proponents of the internet were, really seeing this as a possible way of creating new forms of solidarity and democracy. And the blockchain was genuinely a movement, a moment like this. So, and there will be more moments like that, I guess, which, we could take advantage of, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think, one of the examples they give is, when WikiLeaks was blocked by all the big institutions, PayPal, Visa, all that sort of stuff, that suddenly the crypto thing comes in as as a sort of way of funding, and it is completely outside of the structures that already exist. And it has authority because everyone uses it, because it is networked. So there is something interesting
with NFTs, for example. I think not to sort of turn things depressing again, but I think with NFTs, you sort of see the end really of that. I mean, like, it's clearly one of the things that, from a socialist perspective or a commons perspective, is interesting about the digital world is that there's no scarcity. I mean, clearly, like, one of the very few charms of a tweet is that it is not a depleting resource. And NFTs as a concept seem to sort of reintroduce scarcity into what should have been a kind of bountiful digital commons where things can be infinitely shared and new forms of communication and artwork could be moved forward. But, I have the feeling that this kind of NFT movement represents really the end of the communal internet and a kind of, a moment of sort of reintroducing scarcity into the internet, which clearly social media platforms have been doing with blue ticks on Twitter, with whose tweets to promote and whose to relegate and so on. So, there's a whole corporate network interested in changing the internet from something abundant into something based on an economy of scarcity like anything else. And anyway, we're also screwed there.
Just to turn it, I guess, not to be twee or make it like a positive end or whatever, but Douglas Rushkoff, who's, a media theorist and all that kind of stuff, he's got a great podcast, Team Human, and he was just saying, like, back in, I guess, the 90s or whatever, he sort of had bought into that idea of the internet being this sort of liberating space, whatever. And then obviously it has got taken over. And now his attitude is like, fuck the internet. They can have it. Like, we'll just take back real life. It's a cool idea. How it happens, we'll see.
I think you go ahead, Liam, and go for real life. I don't know about you, Ikoy. Do you want to? I'm going to stay on the internet myself. Ikoy, are you doing real life or internet?
I like to keep all my options open, so I will take both.
Okay, I'm going to stay online myself. So. Good luck out there.
Yes, that's. Massive thank you as always to our VIP patrons: Rebecca Johns, Sheena Belmas, Alexander Lashley, Jennifer Cox, Seamus O'Connell, Alex Placito, and Bruce Rogers Vaughan.
If you have enjoyed anything you've heard Harriet say in this program, you will definitely enjoy Capitalism Hits Home, which is a solo program that Harriet does through Democracy at Work, which is a worker-owned cooperative that produces other great programs such as Economic Update with Richard Wolff and the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles with David Harvey. I can't recommend enough that everyone also listen to Capitalism Hits Home if you enjoy It's Not Just in Your Head.
And you can hear more from Harriet on her radio show called Interpersonal Update. It's on WBAI at 2:30 EST on Wednesday afternoons and in the WBAI archives.